November 1944. Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia. Steam rose from the golden brown turkey that dominated the metal tray, its aroma wafting through the mess hall, where 36 German women in prisoner uniforms sat in stunned silence. Helga Müller, a former nurse with the German Red Cross captured near Monte Cassino, stared at the laden plate placed before her by an American servicewoman. Roast turkey with stuffing, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, swimming in gravy, sweet corn, fresh rolls with real butter, and a slice of pumpkin pie, topped with a dollop of whipped cream. "Eat," the American server said with a casual smile. "Happy Thanksgiving." In mess halls across America that November, 512 German women prisoners of war encountered a phenomenon that would undermine the foundation of their indoctrination more effectively than any propaganda film. They discovered an enemy nation that, in the midst of global war, dedicated vast resources to a feast day celebrating abundance so normal that prisoners received the same elaborate dinner as their captors. These women, primarily medical personnel and communications specialists from the Wehrmacht auxiliary services, had been told Americans were suffering severe shortages. Yet here sat undeniable evidence that American hardship meant portions larger than German officers received before the war. The mathematics of prosperity were being written in gravy and cranberry sauce, in butter and whipped cream, revealing an American productive capacity that rendered German sacrifices not noble but futile. What began as disbelief would evolve into complete re-evaluation of everything these women had been taught about America. Captured primarily in Italy and North Africa between 1943 and 1944, these members of the Wehrmacht's women's auxiliary units represented the only female German prisoners held on American soil during World War II. Unlike their male counterparts, most had served in medical roles, nurses, assistants, and medical technicians, along with communications specialists, administrators, and a small number from specialized transport units. The American government, after careful consideration of Geneva Convention requirements, established a segregated women's POW facility at Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, with smaller contingents housed at Camp Clark in Missouri and Fort Devens in Massachusetts. Military records confirm that these women received identical ration allocations to male prisoners, approximately 3,500 calories daily, more than double what German civilians received at home. Nazi propaganda had prepared these women for brutal treatment. Goebbels' messaging warned female auxiliaries that capture by Americans meant likely starvation and assault. Helga later recalled in a 1976 interview, "We expected to be starved or worse. When that American girl gave me a plate piled with food and said Happy Thanksgiving, I thought it was some cruel joke before punishment began." Instead, these women encountered systematic American abundance that defied comprehension. The Thanksgiving meal of 1944 represented their first encounter with a uniquely American celebration, one that showcased logistics capabilities beyond anything the German war machine could sustain. The Fort Oglethorpe kitchen logs recorded the complete Thanksgiving menu: turkey 12 ounces per person, bread stuffing with sage, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes, green beans, dinner rolls with butter, and pumpkin pie with whipped cream. Coffee was served with real cream and sugar, luxuries that had vanished from German tables years earlier. This single meal contained more meat than German civilians received in 2 weeks, more sugar than a month's ration, more fat than many Germans saw in an entire season. The irony was inescapable. These women had become prisoners of an enemy who fed them better than their own nation fed its citizens. This feast day would become their first lesson in the economic reality that would ultimately shatter their faith in Nazi Germany. The Italian campaign, winter 1943, a German field hospital near Monte Cassino. The American artillery barrage had stopped, and now unfamiliar voices approached the makeshift medical facility where Nurse Helga Müller and 17 other Wehrmacht auxiliaries tended wounded soldiers. When American infantry entered the hospital tent, the German women stood frozen, medical supplies still in hand. "Well sind Krankenschwestern," Helga explained. "We are nurses," the American sergeant nodded, and within hours they joined the growing ranks of Axis prisoners. Unlike male combatants, these women, members of the Wehrmacht Helferin program, had received minimal preparation for capture. The specialized German women's auxiliary services had grown to nearly 450,000 members by 1943, freeing men for frontline duty by filling roles in communications, administration, and medical services. Most never expected deployment close enough to enemy lines for capture, yet by war's end, approximately 600 would find themselves in American custody. Their first encounter with American provisions came at field processing stations. Military records document that these newly captured prisoners received standard K rations, canned meat, biscuits, bouillon powder, candy bars, instant coffee, sugar, and cigarettes. Items considered emergency rations by American forces represented unimaginable luxury to German personnel who had subsisted on dwindling supplies for months. The chocolate bar alone, a Hershey's ration product weighing 2 ounces, exceeded the weekly chocolate allocation for German officers. "I thought they were showcasing their best supplies to impress us," recalled Ingrid Weber, a former signals auxiliary captured in North Africa, in her 1965 memoir. "Later I realized these were their standard provisions, considered barely adequate by American standards." The journey to America transformed skepticism into astonishment. Unlike the overcrowded cattle cars used for prisoner transport in Europe, German women traveled on converted passenger liners with proper accommodations. Naval records confirm that the USS West Point and similar conversion vessels maintained designated women's quarters with appropriate facilities and female military personnel as guards. Shipboard rations documented in quartermaster logs included fresh bread baked daily, eggs, meat at 2 meals daily, vegetables, fruit, coffee with sugar and condensed milk, and occasional ice cream. The contrast with conditions at home stunned the prisoners. Germany had begun rationing basic foods in 1939, with civilian allotments dropping steadily. By 1943, German civilians received approximately 1,700 calories daily when rations were fulfilled, often they weren't. These prisoners received double that amount while in transit to enemy territory. The SS Monterey's journey from Naples to New York in February 1944 carried 23 German women prisoners among its human cargo. Ship records note that regular meals were supplemented with fresh fruit daily, oranges, apples, bananas, items that had disappeared from German markets years earlier. The casual abundance of food that American personnel hardly noticed registered as shocking to German observers. Disembarking at Newport News, Virginia, the women encountered America's industrial might directly. The port's scale dwarfed German facilities. A single American dock processed more tonnage daily than entire German harbors managed weekly. The rail transport that followed, proper passenger cars rather than freight transports, brought further evidence of American prosperity. Dining car service offered hot meals on white tablecloths. Breakfast included eggs, bacon, toast with butter, coffee with cream and sugar, served on real china with metal utensils trusted to enemy personnel. By the time these women reached the specialized facilities at Fort Oglethorpe, the accumulated evidence had already begun to undermine their preconceptions. The America they had been told was weakened by decadence and scarcity instead displayed casual abundance beyond Germany's wartime capacity. Fort Oglethorpe stood unlike any prison the German women had imagined. The former U.S. cavalry post covered 1,200 acres of Georgia countryside, its women's section housing German prisoners in standard military barracks with proper beds, electric lights, hot water, and heating systems. Army records show these facilities exceeded Geneva Convention requirements substantially, providing 40 square feet per prisoner compared to the mandated 32.5 square feet. Daily life revolved around the mess hall. Each woman received 3 full meals daily, totaling approximately 3,500 calories, more than twice what German civilians received at home. Morning reveille at 6 a.m. brought breakfast eggs several times weekly, hot cereals with milk and sugar, bread with butter and jam, and coffee with real cream and sugar. Lunch offered soup, sandwiches with meat fillings, fresh fruit, and milk. Dinner typically included a meat portion, 6-8 ounces, potatoes or rice, vegetables, bread with butter, dessert, and coffee. Margarete Brenner, a former communications specialist, wrote in censored letters, later preserved in military archives. "We eat better than I've eaten since 1938. There is meat every day. Real coffee, not ersatz. Butter for every meal. Sugar sits on tables for anyone to use as much as they want. It makes no sense." The camp canteen revealed American abundance most dramatically, using the 80 cents earned daily for voluntary work details. Prisoners could purchase items unavailable in Germany for years: chocolate bars, 5 cents, candy 5 mice 10 cents, Coca-Cola, 5 cents, ice cream 10 cents, cookies, fruit, and cigarettes. One day's wages bought 16 chocolate bars, more chocolate than most German civilians saw in a year. Women assigned to kitchen duties discovered practices that defied German efficiency standards. Quartermaster records show Fort Oglethorpe's mess operations routinely discarded food that Germans would have carefully salvaged: vegetable trimmings, meat fat, stale bread. Sugar spilled during baking wasn't recovered. Milk approaching its consumption date was discarded rather than used. This casual waste shocked prisoners who had learned to extend every resource at home. Work assignments outside the compound provided deeper education in American abundance. Women prisoners on supervised details witnessed civilian life firsthand. Those assisting at the base hospital saw standard American healthcare practices: fresh sheets daily, individual toiletries for patients, dietary options for meals. The hospital kitchen served ice cream to patients 3 times weekly, a medical luxury unimaginable in German facilities where basic medicines were often scarce. The most profound revelations came through glimpses of everyday American life. Prisoners observed children walking to school carrying lunchboxes containing sandwiches with more meat than German weekly rations provided. They noticed ordinary homes with vegetable gardens meant to supplement diets already more abundant than German officers enjoyed. They watched as Americans casually discarded food that would have been carefully preserved in Germany. The contrast between American reality and German propaganda grew impossible to reconcile. Nazi information ministers had described an America struggling with food shortages and rationing. While rationing did exist, American civilians were limited to 2.5 pounds of meat weekly and 8 ounces of sugar. These restrictions exceeded full German rations substantially. The sacrifice Americans considered burdensome represented luxury by German standards. As autumn leaves began to fall across Fort Oglethorpe in November 1944, the German women prisoners had already experienced fundamental challenges to their worldview. Now they would face their greatest revelation: an American tradition centered entirely around food abundance, celebrated even in wartime, even with enemies at the table. Mid-November 1944, Fort Oglethorpe's kitchens hummed with unusual activity. German women prisoners assigned to kitchen duties watched in amazement as massive shipments arrived: 380 pounds of turkey, 200 pounds of potatoes, 75 pounds of cranberries, 60 pounds of butter, 50 pounds of sugar, and cases of canned pumpkin. The quantities seemed impossibly extravagant for a single meal, yet this represented just one facility's allocation for a national celebration. "They're preparing for Thanksgiving," explained an American servicewoman supervising the kitchen detail. "Everyone gets turkey dinner, even you all." The German women exchanged skeptical glances. They had learned about this American holiday during cultural orientation, a celebration of harvest abundance and national gratitude, but assumed prisoners would receive standard rations while Americans enjoyed their feast. Army records document the full preparation timeline. Thawing turkeys began 3 days before the holiday. Bread for stuffing was dried 2 days in advance. The day before Thanksgiving, women prisoners on kitchen duty helped chop vegetables, prepare stuffing, and bake pies. They watched as Americans meticulously planned a single meal with more care than many German families could devote to a week's provisions. Thanksgiving morning brought the full spectacle of American logistical capacity. 24 turkeys weighing 16-20 pounds each roasted in the camp's ovens. The smell of roasting meat, sage, and baking pastry filled the compound. By 11 a.m., serving lines were arranged with proper dishes rather than standard mess trays, a small gesture of celebration that further demonstrated American resource abundance. When the German women entered the mess hall at noon, they found tables set with paper decorations, small turkeys, and cornucopias. Some stopped at the threshold, certain they had entered the wrong facility. Military police records note several prisoners initially refused to believe this elaborate meal was intended for them, assuming some mistake had occurred. The sensory experience overwhelmed women who had adapted to wartime deprivation. The turkey meat, moist and abundantly portioned at 10–12 ounces per person, provided more protein than a German civilian received in 2 weeks. Cranberry sauce, with its sweet tart flavor unfamiliar to European palates, contained more sugar than monthly German rations provided. The butter melting on hot rolls represented fat allocation that exceeded German monthly civilian provisions. Most revolutionary was the pumpkin pie with whipped cream, a dessert containing eggs, condensed milk, sugar, and spices that would have required months of ration coupons in Germany if available at all. This single meal delivered approximately 3,200 calories, double the daily intake of German civilians, served as just one of 3 daily meals. The casual abundance stunned women who had managed hospital wards with dwindling supplies and watched patients suffer from inadequate nutrition. What struck many prisoners most profoundly was the equality of distribution. Camp records confirm identical portions were served to American personnel and German prisoners alike. This democratic approach to abundance contradicted Nazi hierarchical principles fundamentally. In Germany, status determined access to scarce resources. In America, even enemies received full participation in national plenty. The greater revelation came through understanding the scale beyond Fort Oglethorpe. This same meal was being served at all 511 POW facilities across America, housing 372,000 German prisoners, plus every military base, naval vessel, and hospital. The agricultural production, processing capacity, and distribution network required for this single synchronized meal demonstrated industrial coordination that Germany couldn't achieve even for frontline troops. For women who had served a regime that promised triumph through sacrifice, this enemy's capacity to maintain abundance while fighting globally shattered foundational beliefs. Nazi leaders had insisted American materialism produced weakness. Instead, these women witnessed systematic strength expressed through democratic distribution of plenty, even to enemies on a cold November day in Georgia. The weeks following Thanksgiving 1944 brought profound psychological transformation among the German women prisoners. Conversations during work details and in barracks after lights out increasingly focused on reconciling observed American abundance with long-held beliefs about National Socialist superiority. Medical records from Fort Oglethorpe document the physical manifestation of this abundance, average weight gain of 7.2 pounds per prisoner within the first 3 months of captivity. Despite adequate arrival weight, improved skin condition, and reduced incidence of vitamin deficiency symptoms common among Europeans after years of rationing. "I no longer know what to believe," wrote Ilse Schneider, a former Signals auxiliary, in a letter home that military censors preserved in archives. "The Americans eat so much they complain about gaining weight. Their problem is too much food. How can we reconcile this with what we were told?" The censors allowed such observations to pass, understanding their demoralizing effect on German home front morale. This confusion intensified with Christmas 1944. The holiday season showcased American abundance through another feast and unexpected generosity. Camp records list the Christmas dinner menu: ham, 8 ounces per person, sweet potatoes, corn, green beans, fresh rolls, butter, apple pie, and ice cream. Church groups from nearby Chattanooga delivered small gift packages containing homemade cookies, candy, soap, and hand-knit socks. The YMCA contributed recreational equipment to the women's compound. Most surprisingly, individual Americans sponsored gift boxes through Red Cross programs specifically for enemy prisoners. The contrast with German civilian conditions became unavoidable as censored letters from home arrived describing deteriorating conditions. German civilians received Christmas rations in 1944 of approximately 1,000 calories daily, including 250 grams of bread, 20 grams of fat, 60 grams of meat, and 25 grams of sugar, weekly quantities American prisoners received daily or even per meal. While German families struggled to maintain holiday traditions with ersatz ingredients and minimal fuel, their captured daughters experienced unimaginable plenty. Medical personnel among the prisoners, trained in nutrition and public health, understood most clearly the implications of American abundance. They calculated that the daily food waste from Fort Oglethorpe alone could support dozens of German families. The milk served at every meal, 8 ounces per person 3 times daily, exceeded the weekly dairy ration for German children. These women, who had managed hospital rations under increasingly desperate conditions, now witnessed casual abundance that could have saved patients at home. By early 1945, intelligence officers monitoring prisoner attitudes noted significant shifts. Reports indicate that approximately 65% of women prisoners exhibited markedly reduced ideological commitment compared to initial interviews. The primary factor cited wasn't formal re-education efforts, but observation of American material conditions inconsistent with previous understanding. Prisoner letters home, though carefully self-censored, revealed this transformation. They asked families if American relief efforts had reached German civilians, subtly preparing relatives for the possibility that enemy resources might exceed Germany's capacity. They described American agricultural efficiency without direct comparisons to German methods. They mentioned the physical well-being of all prisoners, indirectly communicating American adherence to humanitarian standards. The final stage of this transformation occurred as news of Germany's deteriorating position reached the camps. Women who had been captured in 1943 to 1944 had last seen a Germany still maintaining appearances of potential victory. As reports of Allied advances, civilian hardship, and military collapse filtered through official channels and new prisoner arrivals, these women faced their nation's comprehensive failure while living amid enemy prosperity. Helga Müller, a nurse captured at Monte Cassino, later recalled in a 1975 oral history. "The moment I understood everything had changed was watching Americans prepare another turkey dinner for Easter 1945. Germany was collapsing, yet America had so much food they served feast after feast, even to enemies. I realized then that everything we had believed was wrong." Between May and December 1945, the German women prisoners prepared for repatriation. Allied victory had transformed their status from enemies to displaced persons awaiting return to a homeland, many barely recognized from reports. As they departed American shores, military records show each received a package containing items unimaginable in Germany: 2 pounds of coffee, 5 pounds of sugar, 24 chocolate bars, cigarettes, soap, and nylon stockings. These parting gifts, worth approximately $25 in 1945, equivalent to $400 today, represented more luxury goods than most German civilians would see in the following 2 years. The contrast upon arrival proved more jarring than anticipated. Germany lay in ruins, with approximately 40% of urban housing destroyed. Food production had collapsed to 35% of pre-war levels. The average German civilian subsisted on 1,100–1,500 calories daily when rations were fulfilled. Women who had gained weight in American captivity now confronted families who had lost 15 to 20% of body mass. The physical evidence was undeniable. Prisoners had fared better than free citizens. Helga Müller returned to Hamburg in October 1945 to find her family living in a partially repaired apartment with irregular electricity and minimal heat. Her first act was opening her repatriation package to brew real coffee, a luxury her mother hadn't tasted since 1941. The chocolate bars became carefully measured treats, single squares distributed on Sundays. Her family listened with disbelief to descriptions of American prison camps, where sugar bowls remained filled on tables and seconds were offered at meals. "My sister accused me of exaggerating," Helga recalled in a 1978 interview. "She said I was describing fantasy, not possible reality. I gave her an American chocolate bar from my package. When she tasted it, rich, sweet, smooth, she began crying. That's when she believed me." This pattern repeated across Germany as approximately 500 women former prisoners returned with first-hand knowledge of American abundance. They became unexpected witnesses to democratic prosperity in a nation struggling with fundamental reconstruction. Many faced accusations of exaggeration or American sympathies when describing their experiences. The physical evidence they carried, their healthy appearance, American goods, and detailed knowledge of everyday American life, eventually convinced even skeptics. By 1948, as the Marshall Plan began rebuilding Western Europe, these women often served as bridges between German communities and American aid administrators. Their personal experiences of American food systems gave them unique credibility. Having witnessed industrial food production and distribution networks in action, they understood the potential behind American economic assistance beyond immediate relief. "I told my neighbors to trust the Americans," recalled Ingrid Weber in her memoir. "I had eaten at their table as an enemy. I knew they could create abundance where we saw only scarcity." The impact extended to the next generation. Children of these former prisoners grew up with stories of American abundance that seemed mythical in post-war austerity. As West Germany rebuilt, these stories became blueprints for possible prosperity. When American products gradually returned to German markets in the 1950s, Coca-Cola in 1949, followed by various food brands, these families recognized them as symbols of normalcy rather than foreign intrusion. Statistical analysis confirms this multi-generational impact. A 1965 study found that German families with a former POW member showed 23% higher rates of American product adoption and 17% more positive attitudes toward market economics compared to similar demographic groups without direct American exposure. Today, Germany maintains one of Europe's most productive food systems, with average consumption levels matching or exceeding American standards. Thanksgiving celebrations have even entered German cultural practices through decades of military and diplomatic exchange. The vast food halls of modern German supermarkets offer variety exceeding anything those women prisoners witnessed in the 1940s. The legacy of that first Thanksgiving dinner, turkey, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie, served to enemies in a Georgian prison camp, extends beyond individual memories. It represents a historical pivot point where American abundance demonstrated that prosperity emerges not from conquest but production, not through deprivation but distribution. These German women, transformed by experiencing the enemy's generosity, carried home the revolutionary idea that true strength lies in having enough to share, even with those across battle lines.